المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خذنا على درب الأمل.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Schools Out. I am Shakira Akabo and this morning we are talking about the necessity of schooling to prepare our children for life after school. The fourth industrial revolution has presented itself with various challenges. One of them, the children have to be and people have to be adaptive to the world around them. There are rapid changes every day, every week, every month. How do we cope with this? This morning we are chatting to Professor Rukhsana Osman, who is the Dean of Humanities at the University of the Witwatersrand. Welcome to the show, Prof.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, tell us about the importance of preparing our learners for the fourth industrial revolution.
So a lot of talk is going on about the fourth industrial revolution, particularly in the last few months, in the last year or so. And the fourth industrial revolution is understood in a variety of ways. Many people are curious about it, but some people are really worried about it, thinking that it's going to disrupt society, it's going to ensure that there's joblessness, and there's a sort of despair around it. But I think your program presents an ideal opportunity to explore some of the opportunities that this new era will throw up for all of us. I think more important is to understand where does it come from. So essentially different periods in society lead to different kinds of changes. Think about it as in the first industrial revolution there was an emphasis on steam power. What steam power did was make human beings or societies more productive. In the next industrial revolution we went on to electrical power and of course making us even more productive. The third industrial revolution really focused on information technology and electronics. And where we find ourselves now of what is referred to as the fourth industrial revolution is really a fusion of a variety of technologies that are quite disruptive. What's different about the technologies from the periods before is that the change is quick, the change is fast, and it can be disruptive if we're not sufficiently prepared for it. So how does one prepare for it? Many parents would think, well, if I give my children skills in this area or that area or that area, they should be prepared for it. But we've seen with prior revolutions and this one, it's not so much the skills that are important, it's how human beings adapt to the arrangement that is unfolding or the revolution that is unfolding. Many would argue that actually it's the same question, and that is, what does it mean to be human in the fourth industrial revolution? What did it mean to be human when IT was evolving? What did it mean to be human when the steam engine was evolving? So essentially the key question facing us with the fourth industrial revolution is, what does it mean to be human in this epoch, and how do we redefine our humanity?
So, Prof, you mentioned that there's rapid change. Obviously, adaptiveness and being able to go with the change and accept new things is part and parcel of what learners and even parents and all of us really need to be able to do. So, do you think that by teaching robotics at schools, are we then preparing our children to accept this?
So, I think it's important to, as part of training for adaptiveness, training for enthusiasm, my own emphasis is always on schools and parents need to prepare young children to be enthusiastic about learning, to be open to learning, to be creative about learning. And here comes in the question of lifelong learning. So I'll get back to your question about robotics, but essential key idea is about how do we ensure that our children adjust to whatever change comes about. Now, philosophically, you can take this up in two ways. You can either say, okay, I'm going to take this empty slate approach and open my child's head and fill him up with the skills or fill her up with the skills, and she'll be able to adjust. The other philosophical approach might be, it's not so much the skills like robotics or programming that's important. What's important is enabling my child to know how to adapt to change, when to adapt to change, and what that requires. And usually that means pushing the boundaries of teaching and learning in the classroom, pushing the boundaries of teaching and learning at home. And part of this adaptiveness is openness to change rather than being overwhelmed by change. Someone most people quote this, they say that the most constant feature of our life is change. And that's exactly what it is being adaptable to this change, not being overwhelmed by it. Now, on the question of robotics, I mean, many children are already playing with Lego at home. The only difference with the Lego is that it's not programmed. Whatever you produce, whether you produce a truck or whether you produce an animal, in the Lego, it's not programmed to perform particular actions.
Right.
What robotics will do is help children to design a program, clear instructions, enabling, for example, if the child put together a truck, then programming of how to move forward, how the truck can move backwards, how does it turn to the left, how does it turn to the right, what can it do to avoid an accident. That is programming whatever the child has developed to do particular actions. And so that's what robotics is really about enabling children to learn straightforward programming. But what is programming? Programming is actually creative thinking. So one child may create the truck and say, I want it to move forward and backward. Another child may actually say, actually I want it to tilt its back, or another child may program it in a particular way. So even programming and robotics is about being adaptable and being creative in how you do what you need to do.
Okay, so you mentioned that robotics forms part of the creative aspects of learning. It also forms part of the STEM, or what we know to be as the engineering and maths part of the curriculum. This tends to be generally male dominated in our classrooms. Is there any room for change, you think?
So many people speak about STEM as science, technology, engineering and mathematics,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And new developments are talking not of STEM but of STEAM, and that is science, technology, engineering, art and mathematics. And that the STEAM approach is really saying that we can no longer just focus on the technological dimensions without understanding how technology interacts with humanity or how humans interact with technology. Now, the question of gender is a very interesting one, and that is that certainly the fourth industrial revolution and the technologies associated with it present a situation where we could perpetuate gender discrimination or we could enable gender parity. And I think your question about how do we enable gender parity through these new technologies is really ensuring more students, more women participate in STEAM and STEM related initiatives, but not just that they participate in it, that schools have good support mechanisms and good support systems that enable young women to want to participate in it. And a lot of literature shows that if you want young women to participate in STEAM related fields, part of it is presenting them with role models, other women who have actually participated and succeeded in it. Another example would be having some kind of a mentoring, so role modeling, mentoring and exposure to a variety of areas of study that young women would find attractive. So I do think that the gender discrimination will be perpetuated in this new fourth industrial revolution period if schools and societies don't do more to support and encourage women to enter these fields.
Absolutely. In a similar vein, don't you think that in terms of, you mentioned about this difference between STEAM and STEM, usually in the STEM fields, we find a lot of children who are traditionally called autistic, and if their ability to be creative in a non-verbal way, obviously using the robotics and the coding and the programming to help them express their creativity, is this not maybe also a way of becoming more inclusive of a variety of people, learning styles, interests of learners?
So I mean, one talks about approaches to learning, and you're bringing the idea that can robotics enable young children, particularly those who are on the autistic spectrum, to be able to engage with these technologies. So what's interesting about robotics and programming is that you know that with autistic children, the idea of complex communication is overwhelming.
Yes.
You know that being in an environment that is unconstrained or too busy is a problem.
Yes.
So the upside of programming is, or at least robotics is, that it enables the child to interact with a machine, but where the instructions are very clear and clean and to the point. So it's a single instruction which an autistic child would be able to easily respond to, because there aren't other other
Stresses
distracting
or
or other
anxiety
distracting,
causing, yes.
other distracting issues
Right.
coming to the table. So robotics certainly has a very good use in that particular context. And of course it can bring about more inclusivity, because more children who would be characterized as autistic would be able to participate effectively in the classroom. But collectively, all of this means that we have to find ways in which we push the boundaries for teaching and learning, whether it's at home or whether it's in school.
So essentially what we're looking at is teaching our children to be lifelong learners and accept and adapt change, rather than focusing on a skill such as programming, coding or robotics.
Yeah, so I think going the route of giving your child the skills with the hope that they'll respond to the change is sort of taking what is referred to in the literature as just in case approach. So you give them all the skills just in case they need it. Whereas a good sound education is about just in time, where you make sure that the particular time that arises, your child is able to respond to that time in an appropriate way. In the end, I think we need to equip our children with ethical tools that help them to make responsible decisions as the fourth industrial revolution unfolds.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for speaking to us, Prof.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be on this program.
Okay. And that was Professor Ruxana Osman, who was telling us the importance of actually upskilling our children, to give them skills that allow them to adapt to change, to become lifelong learners, to become enthusiastic about learning in order to cope with the change that comes before us. Stay with us. After the break, we're going to visit another school that teaches robotics.
زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة.
Welcome back to Schools Out. We are now chatting to Ntato Moachi from Crisp Design, who had a childhood dream of bringing robotics to every learner in South Africa, including those that are underprivileged. Welcome to the show, Ntato.
Hi Shakira, thanks for having me on your show today.
All right, now tell me how you got to this point with bringing robotics to children in underprivileged schools.
Well, this idea started, I think, when I was still a child. I grew up in Soweto, and my mother was just a factory worker. And from a young age, she started buying me Lego building blocks. I think around the age of 11, I really wanted to get into the Lego Mindstorms, which are the robotics kits. But these were too expensive. So I asked her to buy me a robotics kit that came as a monthly subscription in a magazine, but that was also too expensive. So I remember having this chassis that haunted me for the rest of my childhood. But now, fast forward to me being in university, around third year, I realized I could actually design and develop all of those robotics resources that I wanted from scratch. And this is where the idea started. And I started looking at how much are robotics kits these days? Are they still as expensive as back then? And unfortunately they are. And that didn't make sense to me. Because as you know, back then, the most advanced toys were remote controlled cars. But these days you have kids playing with hoverboards, playing with drones. So basic electronics and robotics should be affordable.
Absolutely. I'm sure we all agree with you as parents and teachers. Tell us about what spurred your interest in creating these kits. Tell us more about the kits that you have created.
Yeah. So what spurred my interest in creating these definitely was my childhood, but also realizing that we need to create this in order to prepare learners for the fourth industrial revolution. And when I thought about it, I started out looking at open source software and also looking at basic electronics. So if you think about what we have here, we've got things as simple as just a battery over here. And the whole idea is to actually teach learners about how to work with basic electronics. And these are electronics that they can find anywhere. I'll give you an example. So here you've got a buzzer, right? And it just works out of the box. But then you can easily replace that with a light, like you have over there. But then you start playing around with electronics. So you start seeing that, hey, if you actually had your buzzer or your light connected with a switch in between, then you can actually control the output. And now this can actually expand to you including things such as sensors And the most important of these then is this, which is our controller module.
Okay.
So our controller module is based around Arduino technology, which is open source and available to everyone.
Right.
It's been used a lot in the world by DIY makers. DIY means do it yourself. And they basically build robots out of this. And what this means is you don't need to invest a lot in the R&D to actually put this into the schools. This is where we decided to then focus on the curriculum more than anything else after completing the technology.
Okay, so you have started bringing robotics to schools in poorer communities. Tell us about your journey. How many schools have you reached thus far?
Yeah, so we started our journey in 2016. And like I said, this was just a thesis at that point, but we actually went on to developing the product throughout 2016 and 2017. And this year, we really wanted to look at approaching schools that were innovative thinkers, but that were from the public school space. So we looked at working with a district so that we actually had Department of Basic Education involved in the process. And we found 5 amazing schools within the Ekurhuleni South district. We're in one of these schools right now, Galway Primary.
Right.
And we're working with them very closely to actually put the product into the kids' hands, into the class, and get feedback. Because one of the most important things about these types of products is you need feedback from end users, which are teachers and learners. And this will actually help us refine the product and make sure that it is the best suited product to put within schools, especially schools across the board in South Africa and the rest of the developing world.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about how did the learners react?
So the learners loved the product because for them, the approach is about play. It's
Right.
about exploring,
Yes.
right? And that is not something they actually get exposed to a lot within the classroom because they get bogged down by a lot of theory.
Yes.
And if you think of STEM subjects, STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics,
Yes.
you see that these are very practical subjects and learners need to understand those abstract concepts and actually work with them tangibly. So like I showed you just now with the electronics, once they get to engage with that, they now have a fuller understanding of how electronics and electricity works. And you then bring in robotics as well into all of that. So they've loved it.
Absolutely. I'm sure they've just, all you need is that spark to spur on their creativity and to allow them to explore what they can do and what they can make.
Yeah, and that speaks back to our mission statement as a
Yes.
company. Our mission statement is to spark the curiosity of the next generation of African STEM innovators. And at Crisp Design, we want to do this by instilling them with something called a growth mindset.
Right.
That means that every single one of these learners will be a lifelong learner. So they say 60% of the best jobs of the future haven't even been invented yet.
Yes.
So we need to understand, what are we teaching kids? Do we even know where they're going to go? But if we make sure they have a growth mindset and they have 21st century skills, then they're going to be prepared for anything that's going to come their way.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Ntato, and thank you for speaking to us today.
No problem, Shakira.
Now we're going to be speaking to the teacher at Galway Primary, who is actually responsible for teaching the children robotics.
سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة سمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة.
We are now chatting to Aubrey Herbst, who is the technology teacher at Galway Primary School and who is teaching the robotics class. Welcome to the show, Aubrey.
Hi Shakira, thanks for having me.
All right, so given that your school has adopted this program for a few months now, how easy has it been to teach the learners robotics?
It's been very, very easy because the learners were very enthusiastic. I think they were more inquisitive in the beginning regarding what is it, because when we looked at the product, it was just colored blocks.
Yes.
We got a pilot kit, which is not like the final kit, but the final kits are actually marked. But with the pilot kits, they were not marked, so they actually had to connect them to see what they do, whether it's a buzzer or a light or whatever.
Or what its function
So
was.
that triggered the inquisitiveness of them. And then after that, I actually had a problem keeping them away from class because they were so enthusiastic.
Yes.
But yeah, no, absolutely, the adoption from the children's side was absolutely amazing.
That's really great. And tell us about introducing learners or preparing learners for the fourth industrial revolution.
Well, the problem is that we are basically almost there already and people don't even realize it. My learners asked me, so where can we use this thing? So I said, you must just remember one thing. Robotics is not a robot walking around, picking up stuff and doing certain things. Your microwave, for example, is basically what this is, because you input a time, you input output, what you want, how hot it must be, and then it warms it up for you. But while that's happening, the light needs to switch on the inside of the microwave, the table has to turn, and the timer needs to run down.
Right.
So all those things are happening at the same time, and that's exactly what this is, because when you program these units, you have to give a certain set of instructions.
Okay.
And therefore you get a certain output. And now the same thing is, unfortunately, your car, your cell phone, everything that you are using on a day, even your refrigerator, runs on basically a microcontroller. And this is what this is. This is a microcontroller. And almost everything runs on microcontrollers these days. So we're already there. Now we just need to teach the children actually how to improve, maintain, and develop these things.
Okay. Tell us some of the other skills, not necessarily the pedagogical ones related to teaching robotics, but some of the other skills that the children have learned whilst working together and
Definitely critical thinking, because unfortunately it's coding and robotics isn't straightforward. But now they want it to do a specific thing. But now they need to learn how to think like a robot. With people, it's just straightforward. I want to open that door. So you stand up and you walk towards the door. But for a set of instructions that needs to be given for that function to be executed, they actually have to put it down specifically in a specific order to make sure that it does that. And once they were programming these things, it's doing completely the opposite of what they said. Because it's actually backwards. So they didn't understand that, but now with the experience they are actually learning how to talk to a robot and think like a robot.
so it's been a learning curve for you guys.
Absolutely, even for the teaching staff at the school as well. It's been a journey, but it's been a hands-on journey, and it's very fulfilling, I must be honest with you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Abri, your journey.
Thank you, Shakira.
And that was it. So our children have to learn. It's a learning curve. It is something new. They get an opportunity to express their creativity, and robotics is definitely here to stay. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل.